Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. I see we have people joining still, but I'll go ahead and kick us off. We're at the top of the hour here. Welcome. This is our Nature Journal workshop with Muir Laws. We are looking forward to a great afternoon of diving into how we can use Nature Journal as a tool in educational programming. So my name is Megan Willig. I'm the program coordinator of environmental education at NEEF. And I see some of you are doing this, but if you're just joining, if you want to add in the chat where you're joining from, what your role is. Again, we have a great group today from all over the country, so it's exciting to learn with everybody today. I'm going to start off today with a land acknowledgement. NEEF is based in Washington, D.C., the traditional territory of the Nacotchtank, Anacostan, and Piscataway people. I myself am joining today from Madison, Wisconsin, and respectfully acknowledge the traditional territory of the Ho-Chunk people. With gratitude, we honor the generations who stewarded the land and hope today that we are inspired as we gather to learn from each other, work, and collaborate. I invite others to name and acknowledge their land in the meeting chat box. And if you haven't, also add in the chat box where you're joining from, what your role is. Today we'll start with, I'll give a brief introduction to NEEF and greening STEM, and then we will dive into what is nature journaling with Muir Laws. So we are really looking forward to some great content and learning together with Jack Laws today, and we'll think about how we can incorporate nature journaling into educational programming. Just a reminder, this is a two-part workshop series, so we will meet again next Tuesday. And the registration link that you accessed, it's the same one. So same time, same place, next Tuesday. A couple of Zoom housekeeping items. My colleague Nicole is on the call today. You can find her, she's Nicole NEEF in the participant list. And if you're experiencing any troubleshooting, send her a direct message and she'll be happy to help. We'll monitor the chat too if there's any questions. Additionally, we are recording this meeting, so just a heads up, and we will make that accessible after the meeting. And this workshop today is supported by the Park Service, so we appreciate the Park Service support, and it's through the NPS 21st Century Community Learning Center Greening STEM grant. And so this grant program is a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Education, the Park Service, and NEEF. And it's a grant opportunity to collaborate and provide after-school programming, STEM programming for underserved students. And I'll just note that we do have an upcoming round of additional grant making. So in the meantime, we'll have more information, but in the meantime, if you have questions for myself or Robert Sendry at NEEF or Linda Rosenblum at Park Service. A little bit of background about NEEF. NEEF is the National Environmental Education Foundation. So we are a nonprofit, but we were congressionally chartered in 1990 to complement the EPA. So our work is nonpartisan, non-advocacy, and advances environmental literacy nationwide. So we build relationships with federal agencies, companies, other nonprofits, and work nationwide. You'll see on the screen our guiding statements, and I'll just call attention to our mission. It's to make the environment more accessible, relatable, relevant, and connected to the daily lives of all Americans. So NEEF does this through three main focus areas. So the K-12 education focus area is where this work falls. So through this, we help educators use the outdoors to teach STEM. Some of you might be familiar as well with NEEF's work in conservation and public lands engagement. We get people out to public lands for cleanups and community activities. And some of you on the call may have been involved with NPLD, National Public Lands Day, the single largest day event for volunteerism on public lands. And then in our health and wellness focus area, we help healthcare providers and families address environmental health issues like pediatric asthma. And so in K-12 education, again, this is where our work today is centering. Greening STEM is NEEF's philosophy that brings classroom learning to life through hands-on place-based investigations, using the outdoors as a context for learning. And so we're excited today to think about how the nature journaling tool could be used to get students excited about the outdoors and observing their environment around them. So through our K-12 work, we leverage our relationships with federal, state, and local public lands to support this work, facilitating partnerships between schools and nearby parks and waterways. So a couple of our initiatives in this program area. Some of you on the call today are current grantees for the Greening STEM projects. And so these are on the ground projects, often focused on middle school and Title I schools, since that's where there's a gap in STEM skills and where interest really starts to widen. So we engage these students in environmental monitoring activities in the field and encourage them to examine a local topic in their local community. So we partner with Park Service, like many of you today, BLM, Forest Service, and have private partnerships as well. We have an online collection of resources, the Greening STEM Hub. And this is where we encourage others to learn more about this approach through curated list of case studies and activities and tools to support educators. And we can share that link with you all today. We have a fall Climate Superstars competition. It's an online environmental challenge geared toward middle school students. It's in partnership with Samsung and gets them excited about the environment and how they can take an active role in caring for its future. And then today, actually, we shared our inaugural issue of EE in Focus, a monthly newsletter sharing resources, grants, and professional learning opportunities for environmental educators. So a little bit about Greening STEM approach. Again, I know there's a range of experience today with this, and a Greening STEM is a combination of proven instructional approaches that leverages collaborative interdisciplinary partnerships between formal and non-formal educational partners. And it really emphasizes hands-on experiential learning that centers real-world challenges and student engagement involving the natural environment. So it's a combination of 4 essential components, and these include place-based learning, 3-dimensional learning, which describes alignment with the next generation science standards, which has 3 dimensions: cross-cutting concepts, disciplinary core ideas, and science and engineering practices. Project-based learning, so the best practices in this instructional approach. And then finally, community-based learning, which is incorporating elements of social equity and environmental justice and cultural relevance. So at this point, I would like to poll attendees today. What is your experience with nature journaling? And so you will see a screen pop up asking you, and you can select more than one. So if there's more than one option that applies, you can go ahead with that. Wonderful. And I think we have the option to share results too. I'm seeing we've got a range. There's some on the call today who are brand new, which I think is really exciting because we're going to hear some great tips and ideas from Jack Laws today. A large percentage have some limited familiarity. Maybe you've heard of it or been exposed a little bit. And then some of you, about 20% on the call, do use nature journaling already as a tool in educational programming. So it's really neat to see on this call we have a range of experience, and there's something for everybody. So you'll walk away with more ideas by the end of the day. So I'm going to introduce and then share 2 resources, but introduce our presenter for the day. Our presenter is Muir Laws. Jack Laws is a scientist, educator, and author who helps people forge a deeper and more personal connection with nature through keeping illustrated nature journals and understanding science. His work intersects science, art, and mindfulness. Trained as a wildlife biologist and associate of the California Academy of Sciences, he observes the world with rigorous attention. He looks for mysteries, plays with ideas, and seeks connection in all he sees. Attention, observation, curiosity, and creative thinking are not gifts, but skills that grow with training and deliberate practice. As an educator and author, Jack teaches techniques and supports routines that develop these skills to make them a part of everyday life. And before I hand it over, I just wanted to share from Jack 2 links that attendees may find helpful today. So one is, and these are available, we'll share them in the chat with you, and they're available on Jack's website, johnmuirlaws.com. So the first link is how to teach nature journaling. And this will take you to his store, and you can freely download this resource. And it is full of great ideas that you can leverage as you're thinking about how to incorporate it into programming. And the second link will take you to the Nature Journal Connection. So this is a curated list of videos that you could even use weekly with students, engaging them in developing their skills and comfort with nature journaling. And I will just add that if you have some time to take a look at the other resources on Jack's website, he has many resources on there. And he has a wealth of experience that we're really looking forward to learning from him today. So without further ado, I will hand it over so we can hear from Jack. I think you're muted.
The Zoom rookie move.
There we go, we can hear you.
All right, excellent. Hey there, everybody. I'm really honored to be here with you. I have spent most of my life in environmental education. And have lots of interpretation miles under my belt. I've been through all sorts of different trainings and looked at all sorts of different systems. There's a time in my in the past where, you know, the kind of the state of the art was like, you're gonna be talking about redwood trees, okay, like memorize a botany course about redwood trees and present that to people in an entertaining, engaging way. And I could keep people entertained and engaged, and people liked hearing all my redwood tree factoids. And then I if I kind of got evaluations of that, people would say, I love the program. Boy, you know, he sure knows a lot about redwood trees. And so what that was is, in those days when I was just kind of getting started, like the idea of student-centered learning wasn't on people's radar. And so, you know, I was doing the best with the tools that I had. I did other things where, like, I would learn all these kind of these interactive games, and like, okay, you're the rabbit and you're the fox and you're going to chase you and you're going to chase you and you're going to try to collect these things, and then we're going to kind of see who has the most pieces of corn kernels in their pocket at the end of the game. And I thought, like, I'm teaching about, you know, carbon movement through the system and all this other sort of stuff. The kids had a great time playing tag though. But I realized that a lot of the sort of things that were like my objectives, the big thing I wanted to do was just to help people fall in love with the world and how to really engage with nature. I was looking for the best ways, the best tools to do that. And so if my goal was to help my participants fall in love with nature, I, being a little scientist, I figured, okay, I better come up with, instead of this being all loosey-goosey, let's come up with kind of a working definition of love. So I did. And I want to share with you my working definition of love, because I think it's useful. I think it is a practical definition of love. And I find it applicable to my interpersonal human relationships and also my relationships with place and with organisms, with nature. I believe that love is the act of sustained, compassionate attention. Attention. You sort of think about, you know, when you kind of put the other things aside and you really focus yourself 100% on your partner, and you are really there and present in a conversation, how that changes your relationship with them and their relationship with you. I think that's probably why like so many people fall in love with their therapists, because like somebody's really listening to me. Well, actually, therapists have to have as part of their code of ethics, psychologists, that if your patient falls in love with you, you do not pursue a relationship with them, just because part of that sort of relationship through the attention, people will bond and connect, and you don't want to take advantage of that. But love is attention. I believe that if you can help your participants pay deep attention to the place that you're in or the phenomena that are before you, they will develop on their own an intrinsic, deep connection and relationship with that place or those things. So you can give them the tools to help fall in love with your park, with the organisms around you, with anything, sort of the wonderful things before us. The most effective way is not for me to give them my list of cool facts about the redwood tree, but to train them how to pay attention to that redwood tree. Unfortunately, paying attention is hard. It takes a ton of calories. So I've brought my little assistant here, right? And this is your brain. If you were to take yours out and weigh it, it would weigh about 2% of your body weight for most adults. 2% of your body weight right there. This 2% is incredibly hungry. It demands 20% of all the calories you consume. That's how much energy gets used by this. That is 1 out of every 5 burritos goes to feed the 2%. That's not fair, but it's just the way our brains are set up. So this brain is struggling and doing the best it can. It's incredibly expensive. And if your body has a way of kind of can sort of shut it down and like, all right, you stop working so hard, stop being so hungry, your body will shut that down. So very often, if you just walk up to something and you say to somebody, right, here's an interesting phenomenon, all right? And what I want you to do is I want you to pay attention to this. I want you to look really carefully at this, all right? Look really carefully. No, look even harder. Look harder than that, right? I think that telling somebody to look hard at something is probably the most useless bit of instruction that you could possibly give somebody. Like, what do? You just start looking. You stare at it, and your brain quickly figures out, like, it's not going to eat me. And I know it's a carrot, and it's got some damage in it. And okay, I think I know what's going on here. Amanda says, I feel like my brain needs 2 out of every 5 burritos. Sometimes, I guess it might. How can you get your brain to pay more attention? It's already working hard. And what does that really look like? If you just say, pay attention, your brain kind of goes like, yeah, I got it. I'm okay. And our brains really quickly check out. If you keep saying, keep looking at it, people go into what's called a rumination loop, which is just to save energy. Their brain will notice about 3 or 4 things. And then it'll just notice those same things again, and it'll notice those same things again, and it'll notice those same things again. You have the subjective experience of really looking at the object, the phenomenon, but really your brain is just going, yep, 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 yep. But you're staring at it, but nature just stares back. How can you get your brain to observe and record more? It turns out your brain also has a really hard time handling a bunch of different information at the same time. So studies show that your brain can handle about 7 different ideas at one time, 7 different pieces of information, plus or minus 2. And when you get more than that, your brain just starts dropping things out the bottom of the pile. So you can't hold a lot of information in your brain. So when we kind of go out and I kind of give people like, here's all my cool stuff about the redwood tree, and now we're going to go do the rest of the stuff about the redwood tree, and then here's some more cool facts about the redwood tree. People's brains get full. It's like that old Far Side cartoon, like, may I be excused, my brain is full. So we stop paying attention. We stop connecting through the act of attention. We stop falling in love. Fortunately, there is a solution to this problem. And it's a solution that you and probably all of your park visitors are already using in some places in their life. How many people have a list like this in your kitchen? Why do we do it? Because it works. It works. It works really well. You need eggs, you write eggs down. If you're sitting there thinking to yourself, I gotta get eggs, I gotta get eggs, eggs, gotta remember those eggs. I'm sure I'm gonna remember those eggs. You are completely useless for the rest of the day until something else, squirrel, distracts you, and then you're like, what was I supposed to get? Right? We don't write it down, we don't get it at the grocery store. So, we do that because it works. And what that is an example of is what scientists call externalizing your thinking. So getting it out of here and into a different form. And when you externalize your thinking, that place where you've externalized it to can start to do part of the work of holding ideas and thoughts for you. So you get it out of your head and onto that list. And that list says, okay, I've got it. You know the list has got it. You've ever been preparing for a trip and you're laying there in bed going like, I forgot to pack the sunscreen. I better pack the sunscreen. And you're laying there in bed worrying that you're going to pack the sunscreen. And it just finally like gnaws at you like, I'm totally going to forget that. I'm totally going to forget that. So you either have to wake up, write it down on a little list, remember to get the sunscreen, or get up right there in the middle of the night, go get the sunscreen, put it in the suitcase. Because the next morning, your brain's going to be going like, oh, what's for breakfast, right? So we're doing this all the time, and it works. So what I'm going to suggest is that the #1 most effective tool for getting stuff out of here and to help your brain be able to deal with more is a journal, a notebook. And every scientist that you can name who contributed something useful to the world kept a notebook. The ones who didn't, you don't know their names because they didn't contribute. This is the most important thinking tool that a scientist has. All the naturalists, the old school naturalists that you can name, they kept notebooks. Why are we doing that? They were doing it because it worked. And it's incredibly powerful. This also has another very useful feature, is that when I go out and I observe something, and I put it down in my journal, it's now there in my journal. I have inside my head the subjective experience that my memory is pretty good. When I remember something, you remember this scene, you remember these details about it. The only problem with our memory is that all the research on human memory shows us that human memory is absolutely terrible. And our memories change all the time. And we're not aware of it. Because what happens is when you remember something, it's not like pulling up a computer file in your brain. It's like having a really lousy Xerox of something. And then your brain looks at it and goes like, oh, that's a really lousy Xerox. And so it gets in there and it corrects things and it recolors things and it kind of fills in all the missing spaces with stuff that you completely made up. That's called confabulation. And your brain cannot tell the difference between what was kind of presented to you from a past experience and the stuff that you made up. And the next time you remember that same memory, it's like taking this modified memory that you've made, stick it back through the lousy Xerox machine. Now there's new things that you're filling in. So the more that you remember something, the more you degrade that memory over time. So our memories are terrible. Our brains can't hold much. So the answer is you get it out of here and into here. And this also does this incredible job of helping you focus your attention. When you just say, right, sit here and look at that thing, if you have to record what you see in a notebook, then what happens is as you do that, you have to look again and look again and look again. Your brain can't go into a rumination loop and just kind of going like, yep, I see those things. It can't go into a rumination loop because you realize I've already got that down, and then you look over to the next thing and you can get that, and you can get the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It keeps your brain positively engaged. So what I want to do is to show you some examples of some journals, because we've done a lot of experimenting with like what are the best practices of using something like this. And it ends up being an activity that a skill set that we can all learn, that we can teach our participants to do. And with this skill set, they then go out into the land and have this student-centered, place-based experience that we're not guiding them. We just kind of put the tools in their hand and let them go. They then go out and they connect on the land with the place in a much more profound way that will stick with them for the rest of their life. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to bounce over to this camera. This is a journal, right? There are many like it, but this one is mine. And what I do is wherever I am, I just start recording what I see on a piece of paper. So these were squirrel-chewed pine cones outside a public elementary school where my daughters were going to school. This is looking at the patterns made by and thinking about the forces involved with crashing waves while sitting at a beach. This was looking at a skeleton of an albatross. So this notebook is filled with all sorts of, over here is sitting at the swimming pool while my two little daughters are taking swimming lessons and thinking about the light patterns and reflections on the bottom of the pool and how those colors change. So this kind of a book, I'm using three different languages to to explore what I see. One is I'm drawing pictures. So the part of your brain that is involved with drawing pictures is a part, your visual cortex is back here on your brain. And when you are engaging with that, so you can do that in several different ways. So here's a map of part of a lagoon. The dotted lines show where different groups of birds are hanging out. Here is sort of a view across the lagoon, sort of a non-map view, sort of the landscape view of that. Here's a cross section across the lagoon showing the godwits here, the stilts are here, the dowitchers are over here. So I can use drawings or diagrams to explore information and get it down on in my journal. So that is one tool that I have. Another thing that you see me doing here is I am using words. So the part of your brain that uses words, you've got your prefrontal cortex up here, you've got your language centers, you're dealing with language stuff that is up here. So you've got pictures in the back, you've got words in the front. It's not that one is better than the other, they're just fundamentally different parts of your brain. So when I intentionally use those both together, then I am better able to experience, I'm giving myself more of a trampoline to play around with by using more different regions of my brain, more of a trampoline for my creativity to bounce around with. So the final thing that I'm doing here is you'll see I also very often use numbers to describe what I see. The part of your brain that in fMRIs lights up when people are doing calculations and thinking about numbers is a strip essentially above your ear on the sides of your brain. So each one of these involves a different brain region. So if I am deliberately measuring the distances between, say, the bands, the different arcs of a rainbow, this gets me thinking in one way. When I make a diagram of it, it makes my brain think another way. When I'm then putting that into words, I am intentionally bringing more parts of my brain together. So the reason that I'm doing this is to engage these brain parts. It's not about making a pretty picture. But interestingly enough, if you start to do this on a regular basis, these are my notes from when I had COVID. By taking these different kinds of notes, it makes me pay more attention to the experience. There's lots about this experience that I would have forgotten if I hadn't recorded these notes. So it's an incredibly powerful tool. So that's the toolkit: words, pictures, and numbers. So you want to think of that as sort of one triad of what's going on with nature journaling. There's another triad, which is what are you sort of then, with those words, pictures, and numbers, what are you recording? And I'm going to suggest, to get you started, 3 things. And the first is just the raw observations that you make. So here is this southern alligator lizard, and it poops. Here is a drawing of the poop. I'm diagramming that. I've got words, I've got pictures, and this is drawn life size, so that's a measurement. So I'm getting my direct observations in there. And So all of this starts with just getting yourself to look and to look again, to look again, and to look again. Whatever you see, go back again and try to see that, this was, you don't need a fancy phenomenon for this. This was taking notes of an orange that was turning moldy in my pantry. My observations. The second little piece of this is I am deliberately and intentionally asking questions about what I see. So why is the edge of the green zone a crisp edge? I would expect a gradual fade. So this is still a crisp edge. Why? Does the when found the moldy part was down facing the bottom of the bowl, does the mold favor the dark or does it favor contact with the surface? So I'm intentionally noticing what I don't know and leaning into that discomfort. A lot of people have discomfort with the things that they don't know because we've been taught in school that your goal is to know everything. And if you don't know something, then that's kind of a failing. But here, what you want to do is to notice what you don't know. And that's where the really kind of interesting mysteries are going to start to be. That can pull you off on really fun adventures and discoveries. You don't need to be, you can be in a national park or an exotic place. So here's a note of, here's a journal of field notes from an expedition in Tanzania, right? So these are studies of a leopard in a tree with a little impala dangling down from the tree, a little Egyptian goose standing nearby, tail is twitching, legs draped over the branch, right? So I can do this about this exotic thing. I can also do this about the onion that sprouted in my pantry and then start to follow that phenomenon over time. Here's more about the onion. Here's more about that orange getting more moldy and interesting until my wife made me throw it away. It did start to get smelly. But there's a little bit more onion in here, a little bit. Oh, where's my onion? I don't know. Well, so it can be, what it does is when you kind of look at something this way, it takes the familiar objects around you and makes them interesting. Because anything that you can look at more deeply, the nuances, the beauty that is inside of it starts to come out and play with you. The mysteries will start to come out and dance with you. The final little piece is what we call "it reminds me of." And this is where you're going to take any memories that you have, anything that you have studied, read, experienced, or been told by an elder that in one way resonates with this set of observation or ties into that, you're going to get that down in your journal as well. So that personal lived experience also has a place in this journal format. And this can be as scientific or as cultural or as playful as you are feeling at that time. But one of Tilden's principles is that, if there's something you're trying to teach and it doesn't really relate to the learner in any way, that little bit of information is going to be lost. So part of what we do is we say to ourselves, well, what have I experienced before that resonates with this in one way or another? And we get those things in there as well. And through those kind of analogies, we make ourselves we can make ourselves better observers and find more meaning in whatever we do. So the three pieces are: I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. So my observations, my questions, and the kind of connections that I can make. The tools that I bring to bear are words and pictures and numbers. And you can think of them as two triads. And what you do in nature journaling is you pull those two triads together and then you put them down on your page around your experience with some phenomenon. So you encounter a phenomenon, words, pictures, numbers, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. And that's a skill that we can all learn, that we get better at it with practice. If you're saying, but I'm not an artist, you don't need to be. If your strength is in writing, you can start with that and then begin to build out a little bit. You make a diagram over here, make a map over here, count or measure some things over here. Start with whatever your strength is, but know that if you're intentionally bringing in some of these other things, more of your brain is going to light up. If your comfort zone is drawing pictures, you can start with that. If your comfort zone is more analytical, you can start by measuring things, counting things. And, where was it? Like, yeah, right here. This is a page of very precise measurements of the height of the sun and the sky at different times in different degrees on the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and the equinoxes, as measured from the school playground behind my house. So if numbers are your jam, you can jam with numbers, or you start with words, or start with pictures. But the most important thing is then to start getting things out of your head and onto that, out of your head, externalize your thinking and get it onto that piece of paper. Our old models of thinking was just what is going on inside your electric meter. Now, researchers who study the brain, we think about the brain as a system that interacts with all these different things in our environment. And there's what they refer to as distributed cognition, which is your brain interacting with the calculator is part of your kind of this thinking tool, the notes that you put on the page, the person that you talk with over there, all these pieces kind of come together in our cognition. And the more that we can be deliberate about finding the tools that work the best for us, that's the game changer. So that's why I think that keeping a notebook like this is the major missing piece in the kind of education that we have. And in an environmental outdoor education setting, it is incredible. Programs using it are really easy to plan, really easy to do, and high impact. You essentially are putting tools in somebody's hand, giving them a little bit of direction, and then you say go and interact with the place. They are making their own connections, they're making their own observations, they're finding their own places of personal relevance. They're documenting that down in their book, and they have a really profound transformative experience. The work on your part is, it's one of these very kind of clear situations where you're the guide on the side, you set them up for this experience, and then you kind of let them go. Sometimes you have to get in there and just kind of give them a little bit of guidance, because people will get stuck, and we can talk about kind of how to unstuck people. But the impacts are profound. This has now been tried at all sorts of outdoor education schools, in lots of park settings as well. People are getting a lot of experience with this, and educators are discovering that these programs are high impact. And then also, if you do this in a community where people can come back on a regular basis, people will come back again and again and again and again. You can develop long-term relationships with people in your community. And together you can build this set of skills. So what I would like to do before I kind of get into we roll up our sleeves and actually do some journaling, and I kind of walk you through kind of scaffolding to make people successful. I would want to find out if there are any thoughts, comments, reflections, or ideas that people have. And so perhaps what we can do is, I'm going to bounce over to my gallery view. Everybody's got their cameras turned off. But I know there are human beings out there somewhere. So if you have a comment, a thought, a question, or idea, what I'd like to invite you to do is just use the raise hand function. You can find that under reactions. Let's discuss some of those thoughts. Sometimes when, yes.
Perhaps we'll get some people will unmute too, but I did see there was a couple questions in the chat. I saw there was one, what about using quick photos from your phone for pictures if you aren't a good artist?
Great, let's talk about that. Taking a picture. So the goal of these pictures is actually to get you to observe. It doesn't matter if the picture looks like the thing or not. There is photography and memory have actually been studied, and the results are really interesting. They gave people cameras and sent them through an art museum and told them to take photographs of the pieces of art that moved and inspired them the most. And then when people came back with the camera and they set the camera to the side and they said, tell us about those pieces of art. And the people who had cameras were compared to a control group who were asked to walk through the museum and just sort of observe that artwork, which just moved and inspired them the most. The people with the cameras had almost no recollection of those pieces of artwork. And what happens, they think this is probably tied to what's called the Zergenic effect. The Zergenic effect is, it's got a great name. The Zergenic effect is where you, when your brain gets a feeling of task completion, it then discards a whole bunch of information and sort of neural resources that were put to kind of trying to hold that together. So if you've ever studied for a test, taken the test, and then realized that shortly later, all that stuff that you had kind of temporarily crammed in there was gone, that's the Zergenic effect. The opposite of that is where you are, let's say you get exposed to a little piece of information and you say to yourself like, whoa, I could totally use that in this program that I'm doing in this way. You can visualize yourself, doing it, you're thinking about it, you're interacting with it. That little piece of information, it's going to stick with you because you're not done with it. So it appears that taking snapshots of things, we Zergenic ourselves. So if I put my little iPhone up to the plant and go click, then what you'll see is the person then turns away from that plant and they're on to the next thing. What we're trying to do is to get the person to love is the act of attention. We want to get ourselves paying attention to that plant. And if I just go click, I've got you. I may have a whole bunch of megapixels. I may have a bunch of information stored on the camera, but I'm not actively paying attention. I don't think there's anything wrong with taking pictures, but you want to realize why you're doing it and be intentional about why and how. There's an interesting follow-up study on that where they gave people cameras and they said, what we want you to do is take pictures of the aspects of the artwork that shows in the photographs the aspects of the artwork that make it really special. So people actually using the camera really slowed people down because they were trying to sort of figure this thing out. That ended up improving people's memories. But generally, the way in which people use the camera with the snapshots, like you've seen this at, people come up to the rim. Anybody here from Grand Canyon, right? People come up to the rim of the Grand Canyon. They go like, wow, this is beautiful. This is incredible. And then they get out their camera. Watch what happens after they take their pictures. They turn their back and they get back in their car. Because they've zerged it. Their brain is saying, I've got it with a bazillion megapixels. And so it's okay for me to turn my back on this now. And that's the danger of the photograph. So they can be successfully used, but generally what we're doing here is we're trying to kind of slow people down. And get them to look and to look again. I see that Alexander has a hand up.
Yeah, so is that kind of like, it's like when people go to a concert, instead of like actually enjoying the concert, I see people just recording the whole concert. And it's almost as if they weren't present in the first place. And instead of remembering it, it's like they go back and look at those photos or those videos to relive it because they weren't actually there.
That's a beautiful, beautiful analogy. That reminds me of, I'm going to share a poem with you. This is a poem by Wendell Berry called The Vacation. And you think about, people there, or their child is having their music recital, and the parent is trying to get it filmed, but meanwhile it's happening on the big screen, right? And they're looking at it through their little screen. This is the poem The Vacation by Wendell Berry. There once was a man who filmed his vacation. He went flying down the river in his boat with his video camera to his eye, making a moving picture of the moving river upon which his sleek boat moves swiftly towards the end of his vacation. He showed his vacation to his camera, which pictured it, preserving it forever. The trees, the river, the sky, the light, the bow of his rushing boat behind which he stood with his camera. Preserving his vacation even as he was having it, so that after he would still have it. It would be there. With a flick of a switch, there it would be. But he would not be in it. He would never be in it. That's The Vacation by Wendell Berry. So, yeah, he would never be in it. And that fear that this moment is going to slip from our grasp, that if somehow we could preserve it, my child would stay young forever. That's not the nature of the world. That's not the nature of change. And it takes you out of that experience. So I think your analogy to the concert, where everybody's watching the concert on the small screen, when really life is on the Jumbotron, right? You put down your little screen, you are in the Jumbotron. That's the difference. Did that resonate with what you're talking about, Alexander?
Yeah, it's exactly what I was getting at. After you mentioned, a parent being at a recital, that clicks well too. Obviously at my age, I haven't really got into that step. So something that I actively have done is concerts, and that's something I see. And it's just always bothered me. It's like, yeah, I guess I get taking the picture of like maybe a moment or two, but I see some people the entire concert, they'll just be doing that and their phone dies and they just leave.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting thought experiment. Would you, if you would you go on a vacation if you you could go anywhere in the world, do anything, but at the end of it, your memory of it would be wiped. But knowing that you did it. For some people, their camera is this document of these sort of things that they have claimed and put a stake in. Right? I have the Grand Canyon. I have the Grand Canyon here. Right? Right. That's I've got the Grand Canyon. That's I did that.
And we have another question that's come up a couple times in the chat, and I saw some in the pre-registration. We got this question a couple times too. It was, let's see, speaking to what nature journaling could look like in an urban setting. And I saw in the pre-registration there was a few questions even about just urban setting, or I think we had some about the historical park. So kind of what this might look like, if it's not at the edge of the Grand Canyon, but in a different context.
Yes. So yeah, before COVID, remember those days when you could see people's chins and nobody was on Zoom? In those days, let's kind of go to sort of on this little COVID journey here, because it kind of ties into that. Yeah, the journal, was these, you could go to different places and experience all sorts of crazy things and exotic locations and do stuff. You could go outside with people. And so a lot of my journaling was, I'd going to parks and wonderful places is really exciting to do. When COVID hit, the amount of stuff that I was able to do just went down. But what I discovered was that let's see, let's sort of get to kind of COVID in here. So these are the caterpillars eating the poppies in front of my neighbor's house. This is the onion that sprouts in my pantry and that my daughter decides to adopt. This is sort of tracking an iris that I planted and kind of following it over time. These are dandelions in the roadside next to my house. Here's more about the onion. Here's the orange, which you folks already saw. That is just sort of what happens when you pay attention to anything, is the secrets and the magic that has been waiting inside that onion comes out and plays with you. And that is transformative. What I'd like to do is to show you, I'm going to grab another journal here off my shelf. And that's not it. Hold on a second. I'm going to grab, I think that this is it. Yeah, so this should work. Oh, that's not what I wanted to grab either. Oh, sorry to have you folks wait while I pull books off my shelf. My daughter's school is my daughter's going to Fiesta Gardens Elementary School. It is a Spanish immersion public school in San Mateo, next to the freeway. The resources there in this urban school are very, very limited. So it's not a school with a lot of funding, and the resources on site are limited. There are teachers who are passionate, but they are in a physical environment that there's a is not, it's not, let's just say it's not a stimulus rich environment. Let's take a look at, I taught the kids there at that school how to do nature journal. It became their favorite subject. A bunch of the kids then decided that they wanted to become scientists. A bunch of them would then keep their nature journals. They would bring it on their family vacations. It became one of their favorite tools and sort of a beloved artifact of their time in school. And I just want to show you kind of how in an environment like that, you can make all sorts of things interesting. It's not, here's the critical thing, it's not where you look, it's how you look. And even at Fiesta Gardens School, we were able to take what was there and look at it in such a way that made it fascinating to them. So here is an example of that work. Let's see, this was actually at a different school where I was teaching a little workshop. There was a triangle of grass that was in front of the school. And there were moles and gophers in that. And this is a diagram top view and side view of a gopher mound. This is a diagram top view and side view of a mole mound. So we first kind of learned to tell the difference between those, and then we mapped where those were. And then the kids came up with all sorts of questions about the distributions of these. So we mapped the brighter dots are more recent ones, and as it's kind of getting more faded, those are older ones. So we're looking at where those were here. You know, this is just sort of a piece of turf that, you know, just kids walked over every day. Nobody had ever sort of used that as a kind of teaching area, but it became a place where we could learn about, you know, tools like creating cross sections, top views, and then color coding things and then mapping those. And all these interesting questions. These kids became fascinated with this one little area. The teachers who were at the school said, like, I never realized we had this teaching resource here, right? So this little forgotten area just pounded by gophers and moles, which had always sort of been a visual blight. The teachers, they said, I never realized we had this teaching resource. But again, it's not where you look, it's how you look at it. Let's go over to Fiesta Gardens School. And here we go. So here we are at Fiesta Gardens School. So rain comes and earthworms come scooting out, and they we start looking at the earthworms on the ground, and then and so we had a sort of a brief introduction to the earthworms. Then coming back there with Fiesta Gardens another day, there's all these earthworms that were out there. And this time, instead of so much drawing the earthworms and studying the earthworms themselves, what we did is we used numbers. And with all the kids, they lined up along the side of the dirt ball field, and they walked in a line across the asphalt of the playground. And we counted the worms that had gone, kind of crawled out of the dirt and onto the asphalt. And we're recording how far away they were. So here's the data that the students collected. There were 5 worms within 10 paces, 13 worms between 10 and 30 paces, between between 10 and 20, between 20 and 30 paces, there were 16 worms. So you can see like the number of worms in these different zones. Well, that's interesting. Closer to the grassy fields, there were more. So the kids were learning about how to kind of graph things. And then we went inside because it started to drizzle. And one of the kids looked out the window and they said, you know, there are a bunch of birds out there. And we went running out and we did our study again. And look at what happened this time. There were only 2 worms on the entire field. Everything else was gone. Only 2 worms just 45 minutes later. And the students came up with hypotheses about what is going on. They were pretty sure the birds ate them. Some people thought they might have crawled into the grass. They might have gotten eaten by other worms. Salamanders might have eaten them, or they went down a hole, right? So those are all alternate hypotheses that the kids are making up of this phenomenon that they observed. And then we counted what birds do we see around. We actually then observed one gull eating a worm on the asphalt. I mean, that's pretty cool. So what this is looking at, making some observations, documenting that. We're then able to get change through time. The kids are, one of the things that we're trying to get engage kids with are what's called the next generation science standards, which is to learn science by, how do you ask questions? How do you collect data? How do you do science? So rather than me give a lecture about the structure and reproduction system of worms, we go out and we do an investigation together. We figure out all this cool stuff about worms. Let's take a look at another thing. There were a few in the central courtyard. There were a few little cherry blossom trees. And here is a study that we did where I was teaching the kids about like how do you dissect things? How do you take them apart? And the fancy flowers we had was everybody got a blossom off this tree. We pecked it apart and we figured out what was going on in there, and kids were coming up with questions about these sorts of things. So that was, one study with these trees. The next time we went out there looking at those trees again. Oh, this is great. A well-meaning person had created some planter boxes for a garden at Fiesta Garden School. So they would have a little school garden. That garden had not been tended in years, and it was a solid stand of stinging nettle. That's all that was growing in the school garden. But we used those stinging nettles then as a teaching resource, and we investigated it. And I ended up touching the stinging nettle, and we watched the changes in that rash as time sort of progressed from 30 seconds, what it was like, 30 minutes, 2 hours later. So that's using the stinging nettle, right? This is a top view map and a side view diagram of the central courtyard area, showing the different types of trees, ones that were in there. There's one type that they had which were all green, and then the others were these little blossom trees. And the pink amount of pink in these shows
how much of that tree was in bloom. And what was interesting is that these trees were blooming from the bottom up. I never knew that about these, but the kids came up with tons of questions about what was going on with these. Like, why are some already bloomed to the top? Why are some just halfway? And then we came out later and on another day and did a follow-up. And now those pink trees are bloomed all the way to the top, and they're starting to break out with leaves from the bottom up. So, that's making a lot out of, this place had a few trees. That was the only kind of living planting that was kind of there at Fiesta Gardens, except for the stinging nettle. There was one. See, is it in this journal? No, I think it's in this one. One other kind of example of stuff at Fiesta Gardens. But I think what you're seeing here is that that you don't need you don't need to be at the Grand Canyon for things to be interesting. In Plumas County in California, I did a program in a school there. Around their school sites, their school was covered with snow. And we, over a course of days, I went investigating there and did programs with their kids. And we did all these things, looking at how snow melts on the roof and shapes that icicles take and how that forms. Here's a horizontal icicle. They always point down, but no, this one points out to the side and then curves down. Isn't that weird? So what's going on with that? And we kind of came up with different hypotheses about how this might have formed and what was going on. But it was, the phenomena are, what you have to do is just sort of train your brain to look at the stuff around you as phenomena and realize that there's a process that's going on here. How can I geek out with that and figure out what's going on? This is snow piled on branches. How does snow pile on branches? How does ice form on top of branches? And what you find really quickly, how do these reverse icicles form? So these are reverse icicles around pine needles and blades of grass in a lawn at a school. How did those form? They stick up. What's going on with that? And what you do is you look around for authentic, weird phenomena that you may not understand. And then that's the best place to then start geeking out and exploring. Did that answer the question about the kind of the teaching in the resource limited setting? Is the
We haven't seen a response yet. Feel free to, if that was your question, unmute. Oh, I see a thumbs up. I did see we have a couple more in the chat, and then Alexander had his hand. We've got a couple hands up too.
Excellent.
Yeah, I don't know if Alexander's is still up, but Andy.
So Ruth says, yes, that did help.
Oh, good.
Okay. So again, the big secret is that it's not where you look, it is how you look. And any object in front of you, if you start to, if you just start to pay sort of deep attention to it, that phenomena, you will come to the point where your understanding of what is going on ends. And that's where things get interesting. And what you want to do is sort of find those authentic mysteries and do deep geeking out with your students, recording everything that you can about those. So why don't we go from, we'll jump over to Andy and Alexander, and then there's a bunch of questions that Andy, welcome.
Yeah, I had a question for you. I've worked with people like, I really like having kids do journaling, but I've worked with people who say that, oh, they're just a pain because kids drop them, or, you know, it gets windy, it's raining, it's snowing. Do you have any thoughts or input on that?
Yes, yeah, that's a great question, Andy. And so let's just sort of talk some sort of practicality and logistics. Yeah, it's raining, it's really cold, the wind is blowing hard. And why is my nature journal activity failing? Right? Yeah, anything you do in those conditions it is going to be really, really challenging. And the so your first priority is your comfort of your kids, because if they're not comfy, right, their brains are going to be, you want to take care of those outer shells of the Maslow needs. And when those are taken care of, you can then start doing some nature journaling. Similarly, you've got a bunch of kids who've just arrived at their site. They have been on a bus for an hour and a half and they just arrived. And now you say to them, okay, let's just sit down calmly in this meadow and look at this larkspur, and I'd like everybody to do a little diagram of it, right? Why will that fail, right? Because they need to run, right? If they're cold, right, it's not going to work. If they're wet, it's not going to work. The nature journaling is not doesn't erase all those other concerns. Still, we want to pay attention to what's the energy level of this group. I find like a really high energy group, let's go for a hike. You get up to the top of the hill and everybody's now totally down with sitting down in nature journaling. When it is wet and raining, getting out any kind of notebook and trying to write in it doesn't work, because the water drips down your sleeve, even if you've got like a trash bag over part of you, like it's dripping down your sleeve and then onto the paper. The paper gets wet, it doesn't want to take the pencil. When things are really hot, you know, kids, if you try to sit them down in a sunbeam and draw the cactus, it's not going to work. So we want to really kind of, we always want to sort of pay attention to their needs and things. So I'm constantly kind of looking at like, where's the sun? Like if you're hot, they're hypothermic, right? If you're cold, they're so hyperthermic. They're hypothermic if you're cold. If you're hungry, they're hypoglycemic, right? So we want to, we still have to really kind of pay attention to how they are feeling. And what I do with the with journals, if kids don't buy in on it, then they're losing their pencils and they're losing their journals. So if you go out on a hike, for instance, and you pass out the journals at the start of the hike and the pencils at the start of the hike, half an hour later, 7 of those kids have lost their pencils or lost their journals. Is that your experience too, Andy?
Yes, that has happened.
Yeah, right. So what I do is I hang on to that stuff. It's all in my backpack. And then I get to a place where I want to do some journaling. I explain what we're doing, and then I pass out the pencils and the journals. And then in that journaling activity, it doesn't work for me to say, all right, I want everybody to just take your journal and kind of go journal about things, use word pictures, numbers, you'll see back here in a little bit. They actually need a lot of scaffolding to make them successful. And so that's where the How to Teach Nature Journaling book is really, really handy. We've got more than 30 different activities that have been kid tested, where we give really kind of clear structure of like, you know, here's how you make a cross section of something. And let's just, so you bite off little skills at a time. Here is this zoom in, zoom out. We're going to look at an object life size. We're going to do a magnified view of part of it. And then we're going to zoom back away from it and kind of do that, do the larger view. So that they're doing some project where you give them very specific instructions on what they're going to be doing. We'll be doing an example of that. You give them you pick the phenomenon for them at the start. At the start, when you say like, pick an interesting thing in nature, they're overwhelmed. They're like, I don't know where to start. And you'll find like the kids are just like walking around all over the field. They're like, I don't know which one to do, right? And so at the start, we kind of give them more constraints. And within that, they have a lot of opportunities for, making it personal and creative. But at the start, you need a lot of scaffolding. Remember that school up in Plumas County? There is the district environmental educator there has been working, is one of these people who's like just got the bit in his teeth and ran with it. It's a fellow named Rob Wade, and has turned that county into this environmental education hotspot. Supports all the teachers, has got buy-in from all the teachers and all the schools in the county. And every kid, every grade, every week is nature journaling. And so during the pandemic, because they had all had practice with this, and the kids have developed all these skills, like they know how to do cross sections, they know their pace, they know how to make maps, they know how to zoom in on things, they know how to, sort of, if you do an enlargement of something, how to estimate how much you've enlarged it, all these sorts of things. They've got those skill sets because they kind of built it up piece by piece. So during the pandemic, Rob was able to say, I want everybody to go out and find an interesting phenomenon and journal about it, and then we're going to come back and share those. And the kids would go out and do all these incredible things. But there's no way you'd be able to do that at the start. At the start, he built that by scaffolding all these skills. And we give examples of all those scaffolding skills in the book, How to Teach Nature Journaling. There's a free download of the entire book. Also, another way of getting the scaffolding is I'm making this video series. There's going to be a total of 40 videos, which will be between 10 and 15 minutes long, that week by week, each one builds a little new nature journaling skill. So in one of them, we'll show like, here's how you make a cross section, right? Here's how you kind of do a diagram of something. Here's how you write a poem. You can use those also to kind of progressively scaffold and build skills. But you're right. It's if the kids are not comfortable, or if the kids don't feel safe, they don't feel you're really looking out for them. If they feel like, like we're frying out here and you don't care, right? They're not into it. And once they are really into nature journaling, you actually can have them responsible for all of their supplies. There's a teacher here in California who went nature journaling with her kids every week. She actually sewed for the kids. All of the kids all had these little shoulder bags that she personally sewed. And they all hung on little pegs with the kid's name on them beside the door. And they would all go grab their bag and they would head out and they would have their essential gear in it. Those kids were totally bought in on nature journaling, and she could trust them. These were 4th or 5th graders, and they weren't losing their stuff because they were bought in on it. But if she kind of gave them that stuff at the start, then like, oh, I left my whole bag out there. But no, once it's like their journal, like those kids at Fiesta Gardens, by the time we're done, if at the start I said, yeah, you could, if I told them, yeah, you can take your journal home, they would bring their journal home and then forget it. But by the end, I was telling them, yeah, you can take your journal on vacation. And the kids would come back with their journals and would have a whole bunch more entries in it because they were invested in the process. But at the start, if they're not invested in it, like, yeah, I lost my pencil. Andy, did that kind of address what you're asking about? Or are there any kind of follow-up questions?
No, that was it. Yeah, that was a lot of it. I guess because we're oftentimes working with students and we've got 2.5 or 5 hours with them. We can't scaffold over time. So any strategies there?
Yes. So I would hold the journals myself. I would have the journals and the pencils in my backpack. I would have the journaling be a part of the experience, not the whole experience. But what you're going to do at some point, you're going to try to do something to kind of really take them in deeper. So you're going to go around to do several things in your place, and then you might end up at some point where you're going to then sit down, you're going to pass out you're going to explain something, and I'll give you a little bit more scaffolding on how to do that. And you are going to then you'd pass out the journals and the pencils at that point, do your activity, do a follow-up discussion with it, and then recollect those things, the pencils and the journals, put them back in your backpack, and continue on down the trail. You might use the journal, if you have like a 5-hour program, you might get it out 2 times, maybe 3 times, and have them be these sort of journaling events. But if they're carrying their gear for those times, in a program of that duration, there's probably not enough time for them to really invest in the process and the gear. So you'd end up losing a lot of pencils. Andy, did that address your concerns?
Yes, thank you very much. That's really helpful.
Great, thank you. Let's bounce over to Alexander.
Hi. So I guess what I wanted to bring up, because I saw when you're sifting through your journaling book, a lot of the things you were going through actually reminded me of GIS and arc maps. And I was wondering, I guess, what your opinion on is with journaling and transitioning that data into something that you would use with arc maps. Because I know you can't be there on the field and setting up, like, coding and doing your arc maps like live right there. But a lot of the stuff that you did, like the drawings and everything, can be translated almost verbatim into a mapping program.
I don't have any experience with arc maps. Tell me a little bit more about this, and I'll see if I can make any sort of useful thoughts about it, but I don't know the system. I know about geographic information systems, and are you talking about, is this
Arc maps is a GIS program where you usually code in Python and you translate data into maps, and you can use it to, let's say if you're working for the city, you can translate how much damage a tornado did to specific parts of the county and whatnot, but you can also use it for different things such as archaeological data, dig sites, and other forms of sciences.
That's cool. Before any GIS system was ever developed, people were taking notes like this, and I think that you probably can, if you know what your coding is. There are codes for things that would probably also make it easier for you to kind of do shorthand for kind of taking notes in the field. But you'd still not want to limit yourself by only collecting data that will translate into arc maps. Because sometimes, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem starts looking like a nail. And so something that is neat about the Nature Journal is that it gives you this very open-ended platform for putting in information. You've got these 3 systems: the words, pictures, and numbers. And if the words and numbers translate easily into the coding that you do, but the pictures don't, there might be a tendency then not to use visual tools for documenting your information because it would be hard to code later. And then you get into the same problem that some teachers get, that like, wow, this is a really useful thing to teach, but how would I evaluate that? I only should teach things that I can evaluate. And therefore, if I can't evaluate it, I will not teach that. And I'm going to teach more things that can be evaluated, which is kind of, then you've got the cart driving the horse. So you wouldn't want to make sure that, you want to make sure that you kind of keep an open-ended system for thinking on paper. Sort of the journal is your brain on paper. And that your thinking doesn't get constrained by only putting in those things that easily then translate into, say, the ARC system. Did that address your question? You're currently muted.
Yeah, I did. I was just curious about the concept of journaling and its implications with something modern like ARC maps. So,
yeah, I think it's very they're like, a lot of people will journal and then translate that stuff into eBird, and but you don't want to only record the things that you would then put into eBird, because you can do a lot more in your journal than you can put into eBird.
mm-hmm.
And so you just don't want the data system to then dictate the kind of information that you collect, because that will constrain your thinking.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of like just living off of iNaturalist. It's not something you want to like follow, like biblically almost, like.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's some questions I'm seeing about what sort of journals to use. And that depends very much on what kind of a relationship you're going to have with these participants over time. For you yourself, you want to get a journal that is as large as you will realistically regularly bring with you into the field. Because it's your brain on paper. If you have a small window that you're looking through, it is going to constrain how you think on paper, right? The larger that is, the more you can get different ideas playing on that page at the same time. And that helps you kind of get a sense of place and think more broadly. If War and Peace were written on tiny notebook pages this big, it was the best of turn the page times it was the, like, no, the size is going to get into your way. But when you get to be too big, you tend to leave it at home because it's a hassle to bring. So as large as you realistically bring, I recommend you get journals with a sewn-in binding. They will stand, rather than a spiral binding, because they stand up to the rigors of being in the field much better. For journals for your participants, if you have lots of people for a short period of time, one way of doing that is to get yourself a center punch stapler. It's a stapler that, you know, if you have a, if you have a piece of paper and it's folded like this, right, it will allow you to put staples there and there. And then you just get yourself a piece of cardstock paper and maybe 3 pieces of copier machine paper. You fold them and center punch them, and you've made a journal. Giving hardbound store-bought journals to all your participants just would not be cost effective. So that's kind of one way around it. But if you are going to be working with students over a longer period of time, giving them a journal that feels a little bit more like a real book helps them kind of buy into it, that it's a thing. There's a source called Bear Books, B-A-R-E books, where you can get a hardbound book with about 30 pages in it for about $1.50. And that's great. But still, even that, if you've got, you know, programs where you're only with people for a short period of time, that's not going to be really cost effective either. For yourself, go to an art supply store and pick up all the different journals, open them up, feel the paper, get one that feels right for you. that's kind of got your look to it. And then you can, I on my website, I sell a journal a kind of journal that I made, that sort of, I put the features into it that I like, but it wouldn't be cost effective to get these for all your students. So I like having rounded corners. I like journals that open flat. I like having a band that I can put over my pages, so when it's windy. These ones also have in the back, there are a number of pages with ideas and suggestions for strategies for nature journaling, and that helps as well. For other materials, the easiest is just to get yourself some number 2 pencils. If you get fancy art pencils, then it feels like, ooh, you have to have fancy art pencils to do this. But if you've got number 2 pencils, kids know how to use those. And when Samantha mentioned, pencils are always the first casualties in any activity. And when you do lose some of those pencils, you're not going to go like, oh man, there was half my budget. You do expand on that a little bit. Getting small sets of colored pencils for your different students is great. You can do other things to kind of augment these journals. On my webpage, I've got the templates for like sets of rulers that you can print out onto Avery labels, those long Avery labels. And so you just put you buy a package of these long Avery labels, you put those in a copy machine and you hit print, and it prints out rulers for everybody. And then you put the ruler, you take the ruler sticker off, you can stick that in your journal, and now your journal has a ruler in it. Nobody loses their journals. So there's a number of things like that that are also resources on my website. So yeah, do I bring colors? For student colors, the best way, at some point your students are going to want to add colors. It's so much fun to add colors. So a great way of doing that is with colored pencils. I don't recommend doing watercolor in the field with your students because there's just more of a learning curve. You can, if you get really good with watercolors, you can make them work faster and more efficiently than you can with colored pencils. But in order getting to that point, there you have like these pages that are wet and they're kind of like dripping all over the place, and this is blending into that and it's not working, and we have to head down the trail, but this isn't dry yet, and it's a nuisance. So with the colored pencils, everybody knows how to use them. So small sets of maybe 8, 10, 12 colored pencils that each student would have. Then you want to recollect those before you head down the trail, or if everybody's bought into it, everybody can have their own. If you're doing public programs where you have announced that we've got a nature journaling program, so at some parks there are monthly nature journal club meetings, and you can come to the event. In those, what I recommend is that you advise everybody bring your own journal and your favorite nature journaling supplies, and you don't have to do anything with supplies. Have a few center punched extra little journalitos ready in case somebody shows up and they like, oh, I didn't see that. But most people have some sketchbooks sitting around their house, and that'll be better paper than you'd be able to provide for them. And then also, if they then continue on doing it, they've got their own journal, they're doing it on a regular basis. I'm dyslexic, so sometimes my reading is kind of slow. But Megan, are there other questions that you're seeing at this point?
I saw there was one about how much time you'd recommend making observations or writing descriptions. And it says, how much time do you suggest spending per observation to make the drawing / measurements and write descriptions? And do you judge by student participation?
That is, so let's and also I want to do a quick time check. How much time do I still have?
We have a little, right about 20 minutes.
Right about 20 minutes. Okay.
Yep.
What I want to do in the next 20 minutes is I am going to take everybody through a little kind of nature journaling journey. And we are going to, I'm going to present an activity to you. And then what we'll do is we'll then kind of meta-analyze it as educators. And we won't have time to fully do the activity ourselves. But you'll kind of see how we get into that. And so I need to grab something right outside my door. So let's take a look at how we would go about scaffolding one of these experiences. And what I'm going to do is I am going to describe a wonderful introductory activity, how I would describe it to a bunch of students. First, I'll give you the context that we're doing it in. I'm going to describe this activity. We're not going to have time to really I'll do that. Does everybody have some sort of vegetable from their kitchen with them, or a leaf of the vegetable? I'm hoping that you do. And if you don't, bring one. Oh, look at Megan's got a, she's got her little red pepper there. All right. I'm going to assume that everybody has a little vegetable with them, right? And this, when you're doing this with really young kids, everybody can have, you know, a different vegetable, or they can have a different plant. So if you're doing this where you can either do this in a couple of different ways, where you supply the thing to them, or you're out in a field and there's a bunch of wildflowers out there. And here's what or let's say you're under a tree and there's a bunch of leaves. Here we've got our vegetables. What we're going to do is, in just a moment, we are going to do a leaf investigation on the pages of our nature journal. Or if we've got the vegetables, we're going to do an investigation of our vegetables in our nature journal. But in order to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to get some notes that are going to allow us to play a little game. And here are the rules. When I say go, I would like everybody to open your nature journal to a page. So here is my page, my journal that's open. And what I'm going, oh, this is one of the stinky, this one is really bad. So if I collapse, somebody contact EMS and say that there's, here's what I'm going to do, is on the pages of my journal, I am going to want to describe my vegetable using words, pictures, and numbers as richly as I can. And so I'm going to put this under my document camera here for a second, just to sort of show you how I might kind of go about this. Everybody's going to have a slightly different vegetable, so your approach can be just a little bit different. But here's my vegetable. And what I want to do is I want to get a description of this. Mine is too big to fit on this entire page. But if I've got a smaller thing, a great way to start is just by, you know, you can even sort of lightly trace it. And then once you kind of set it off to the side, you can make a little bit of a better tracing. All right, I can go like that. There we go.
but mine's really big and it's not going to fit. You know, I still actually can probably trace it a little bit. There we go. And what I like to do is just to sort of often get a light tracing to kind of get me going, something like this. And then I will start drawing over that. But this often helps me kind of get something that's just the right size. And what I want to do is to get information down that is going to be really specific about my vegetable here. All right, so, and you know, for instance, I can say that this part I've drawn that this part is thick and this part is thin. Sometimes I can do kind of a show and tell thing here where I'm going to write that this part is wide and this part is thin. I can also use words to describe parts of things that are hard to show with my pencil. So for instance, I put that this is orange here and this part's yellow. I also, this one has a big crack in it. So I'm going to just draw part of it here. And I can show that there's this big crack in it. And sometimes you'd look at that like, you know, like, is that a stripe on it or is that a crack? And it helps if I draw a little line to it and it says big crack. And it is yellow inside, yellow core inside, right? So I can use words to describe that. I don't also have to do everything, you know, life size. I can draw a little carrot off here on the side. And I can show that it has this big tassel of green things. And that each one of those, I'm going to do an actual size little drawing of one of the leaves. Each one of those has all these little hairs that stick off on it. There's a little branch with little hairs. Somebody write into the chat something that you notice about this carrot that would be difficult to show with a picture and that words would be really useful to describe on there. This part's green. What's another way that words could be really useful in doing this? Oh, the texture. Yeah. All right, so there's some residual dirt up in here. There's sort of this zone here with dirt on it. Dirt on there. If I just sort of drew little dots in there, that wouldn't be as clear as a little line saying, yeah, there's some residual dirt. This part here is smooth and cool. That texture, smooth, cool. Little lines kind of going across it. So I can show that with my drawing, and it also helps to, again, show and tell that I can sort of write in that, you know, there's little lines, that little grooves across it. Somebody's mentioning the smell, right? All of those are kind of great examples. What I want to do is I'm going to ask everybody to, we're going to be using words and pictures. I'm also going to encourage you to see if there's some place where you can find numbers in this. So as I'm looking at this, what might be things. So the ways we get numbers are very often by counting things, measuring things, timing things. Ooh, there's little hairs on these. I'm going to write that in. Ooh, little. I'm going to draw a circle around one of these and do an enlargement of that. Ooh, its little leaf is here, and there are little hairs. Little hairs that are white. But I got distracted. Can anybody think of a way I might be able to find numbers in this object? Oh, the length. So Josh is saying, let's get the length of this. All right. So this part here is 14 centimeters, and this part here is 7 centimeters. All right, so I'm going to draw a little line. I'm going to write 14 and have a line coming out to here. And I'm going to go 7 and have a line like that. 7 centimeters, cm, centimeters, cm. All right, so I've got words, pictures, and numbers. And what my challenge is for you folks is for everybody to get their words, pictures, and numbers, and try to get as much information as you can on your page as you can about your, so this is good, the length of the carrot, the length of the greens, total length, number of leaves on the top, all right? See, like that's a great way of getting a number. Didn't think of that, so I could count those, right? The length of the crack. You can estimate the amount of days, like, oh, see, that's interesting. Hunter is wondering about how many days might it have taken for this to grow? So that's a good question. I'm going to write that in. How many days did it take to grow? Put a big question mark next to that. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all 15 minutes to document and describe your vegetable. And then we're going to take all of these pages and our vegetables. So don't eat your vegetable yet, because we're going to play a game with those. And we're going to need your notes, and we're going to need your vegetable. Are there any questions before we start?
Jack, could this be modified? I think we have about 8 minutes left in our
No, that
time
actually
today.
was the next point.
Okay.
I realized there are no questions. I said we're actually going to skip the part of the activity where we do this, right? But you see how, but what I'd like to do here is just kind of unpack what I've been doing. What have I been demonstrating? What sort of pedagogically, what have I been up to for the last few minutes here? Why did I do this? What am I trying to get the students to do? So inquiry, that's right. So Liliana mentions inquiry. So Hunter comes up with a question. I seize on that question. I catch that question that Hunter came up with, right? So I'm keeping, Josh is talking about sustained attention here. And that's right. So I am kind of getting myself to kind of go back to it. Can I get another nugget of information? What else can I see? What else can I see? What else can I see? You notice how when you're putting things down on the paper, it kind of one thing pulls you into another. Catherine is noticing how we're focusing on details. So I'm trying to get as specific as I can about this individual carrot, right? Master Cruz says you're going to tangibly observe, right? So what I'm, we're doing deep observation here. I have, for my drawing tool, I have, and my media here is, notice that I've got just a small little whiteboard and a fairly thick, stinky pen. This doesn't end up being a pretty picture because you really can't do that with an Expo pen. But you can quickly get the idea across that visually I'm showing people that we're using words and numbers
and pictures together. I've also demonstrated that we can get multiple pictures in here. I demonstrated that we can do enlargements of things. I demonstrated putting a question on the page, and everybody now has the idea of, oh, I'm going to get a page full of stuff. So what I do at the start is I've now scaffolded this idea of how you're going to geek out with your individual carrot, right? And and people have an idea of what that's going to look like. Seeing this, and not just me describing it, but people seeing this is going to then help them sit down and they know exactly what to do. So notice that you right now, you know what your next steps are with whatever object is in front of you. I like what Joanna says, you're truly living the moment and paying attention to the details of the carrot. You will certainly remember many details of the carrot for a long time to come. So that's right, whatever phenomenon it is that I'm looking at, I'm going to look really hard and intensely at that. And I'm also going to be doing that in this way that is using all sorts of different parts of my brain. Then I'm going to give my students time to do this. So they now have time to kind of geek out, do this project. And what I do is I'll tell them that I can say, like, you have 14 minutes to do this. And then what I do is I just start looking at their behavior. If they seem to be getting fidgety and restless, my 14 minutes might be shorter. At some point I might say, right, you've got 3 minutes left to put some final details in. Or sometimes what I do is, or sometimes when I look around and I see everybody's really into it, I let that 14 minutes go on to 15, 16, now it's 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes into it, and these kids are still like digging into their vegetables. And I'll think to myself, like, okay, that's what I want them to be doing. So I'm going to just let that run. I'm not looking at my watch. Who cares about my 14 minutes? I'm just watching them watch their vegetables. Now, at some point, I think, like, I might need to have to wrap this up. And I say, raise your hand if you'd like a couple more minutes to finish doing what you're doing. And usually there's a ton of these hands that go up. Say, all right, let's take 2 more minutes. Let's take 2 more minutes. And then I'll say at one point, there's 1 more minute left. All right, I'm going to ask everybody to bring it in. We're going to make our final marks. Let's put the date on the page and and the location where we are. And everybody bring your vegetable and your journal page over here. So we go to a different place. By the way, a little dry erase board for you to throw in your backpack as part of your environmental educator supplies. This is one of my go-to essential pieces of gear. No matter what I'm talking about, I'm constantly using a little dry erase board. If I'm trying to talk about an idea, I diagram it here. If I'm introducing a new word, I write it on here. The English language learners in the group go, like, thank you. And everybody else gets this sort of visual reinforcement. So anytime we're just talking about ideas, if you can also make some icons and pictures to reinforce what you're doing, the little whiteboard is your friend. Now I'm going to bring them over and I'm going to say, here's what we're going to do. And I'm going to ask everybody, follow me. And so we're walking around and doing the little follow the circle. And I eventually get everybody walking in the circle. And I say, we're going to stop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stop. Okay, let's spread out a little bit on that side. So everybody's now stretched around the circle. I'd like everybody to sit down. So now we have our group sitting around in a circle like this. Here are the students. And I then say, all right, what I'd like you to do is to take your journal page and just reach across the circle. This isn't too far, right? Reach across the circle and put your journal page somewhere, like this person is going to put their journal page somewhere over here. This person can put theirs over here. We're going to make this inner circle of journal pages, but your journal, the important thing is your journal page is not in front of you. And what I want you to do is now look down at the journal page that is in front of you and notice how they collected information. Were there any kind of interesting strategies that they used to show information about their vegetable? Are they using any strategies that you might like to use? All right, now they've looked at some of these. Now take your paper, pass it to the person on your left. And so they look at a different one. Notice how this person did it totally differently. And it's a little bit impersonal because it's not like you're saying, this is my page. You're looking at somebody's page. You don't really know whose it is. So there's less kind of pressure like, oh no, right? Does anybody see a strategy on here for describing part of it where the person is putting in a really specific detail, a very, very specific, subtle, just unique detail? What might that be? This person says, well, this person over here says there's got this little hole right in here. Like, oh, okay, that's a great example. Does anybody see where somebody's using a number, a measurement, or counting something? Oh yeah, well mine is they're showing how long it is. Okay, that's a great example. Now what we're going to do is pass it over one more. So you're looking at a different one. There's a different one in front of you. And what I would like you to do now, put them back on the ground. So these go back on the ground. And you've got somebody else's in front of you. And let's put our vegetables in a pile in the middle. And what we're going to do is we're going to go one at a time. Is when so it'll start with this person on my left, or actually so we can start with anybody. If you look out there and you see one of the vegetables out here that goes with a particular page, you can take that vegetable out of here and put that on top of that page. And then if you want to go next, raise your hand, and that person will then point to the next person. So this person then points to this person over here, and then that person takes this vegetable and it puts it right there. Or takes this person over here, takes this vegetable and puts it over here. So you don't have to put it on the one that's right in front of you. And in your turn, you can either take one from the center and put it on a page, or you can take one from one page and you can put it on a different one. And eventually you get all of them out of here. And this activity, I'm sure you can tell that it works with a vegetable. With fourth graders, I can do this with individual leaves. With individual leaves off the same species of tree. So individual leaves from underneath the tree. And this same activity, it works. If you have a really large group, divide them in half. And so you've got sort of a smaller number of people. But you can do it with leaves. You can do it with branches, fallen branches of redwoods. You can do it with just about any phenomenon that people can pick up and hold in their hand. And it's a great way to demonstrate these initial strategies of how we're going to start journaling on our page. Then what I do is, I'm going to come back to this view. This used to be where I stopped the presentation. And so we would go do some journaling activity, and then we'd kind of have a little wrap up, like, and talk a little bit about the journaling. But what we realized is that after kids have really looked carefully at a phenomenon like this is an incredible opportunity for having a discussion about sort of larger ideas. If you are working with the next generation science standards, this is a great opportunity to bring in one of the cross-cutting concepts. And I'm going to give an example of that. So what we do
is I might say to the group, all right, sort of in science, we have this, I've made this observation that very often we can sort of figure out how the structure of something, how it's shaped and formed, or the colors that it has, relates to what it does. So for instance, on this, you know, this, this structure here, it has, the idea is that there's a structure and it has a function. Can anybody take a look at any of the vegetables that we're seeing in front of us and come up with a possibility of, I noticed that it has this shape or this form on it. I wonder if that could be for this function. See if you can tie a function to a structure that you're observing. Let's see if everybody can take a look at this one right here. So I'll put it in the, that's out in the sun, we'll get 2 weeks there. There we go. So take a look at this one here. And in the chat, you don't have to be right on this. What is a possible, plausible relationship between you see a structure and what could the function of that be? I'll get us started. I wonder, I'm seeing that the leaves here have tiny little, they're not big bushy leaves, but they're kind of in little fingers. I wonder if that's so when the wind blows, it doesn't rip those leaves around as much. Maybe this is a little bit more fragile. I don't know. That's a possibility. What's another one? All right, the green, this part here, I wonder if this part here could be for grasping and holding on things. It certainly looks hooked and there's kind of a hooked shape to it. So you see that what we're doing here is we're thinking about the relationship between structure and function. And you don't have to be right, but you could then facilitate a really interesting discussion around that, because everybody's been looking really hard at this. You'd have a very different discussion if you were taking a look at this from the perspective of change through time, or perhaps relationships and interactions with other things. That is an example of kind of scaffolding a nature journaling activity, giving some very basic, it's an introductory thing. Essentially in terms of skills, we got us to do words, pictures, and numbers on the page.
Jack, I really appreciate your scaffolding activity, and I'm looking forward to picking it up next week. I know we're at time here, so I do want to respect our participants' time. Is there anything in particular you'd like people to bring for next week? Again, we get to meet same time next week on Tuesday.
So there's actually a little bit of homework. Between now and next week, I would like you to, on your page, on a page of a journal, I'd like everybody to go find a journal that feels right to you. And then find a vegetable from your refrigerator and geek out on it. Go for deep geeking out. And what I want everybody to notice is that as you are documenting things about your vegetable on your page, there will come a point where you will get a very kind of clear feeling of, and I'm done. Okay? Now, that is just a feeling that comes to everybody at some point during any investigation. And all it means is that this is the point where you usually stop paying attention. And what I'd like to invite you to do is to, when you meet that moment of, oh yeah, and I'm done now, is to keep going and sort of find the next thing and the next thing. Make the next observation and put it down. Make the next observation and put it down. What is the most interesting observation or question that you can come up with after you get that feeling of being done? And seeing how deep you can go down the rabbit hole of just any little vegetable that you happen to focus on. And let's bring those next time. We're going to start in early on. We'll kind of bump into some chat rooms. You'll have a chance to share your vegetables and your observations with other people. I also like you to think about the impact of this kind of programming on participants
and what kind of programs you would like to run at your site.
Well, this will be fascinating to pick back up next week. Looking forward to seeing what everyone comes up with over the next week. And we'll follow up this evening with recording and a survey link as well. And then look forward to seeing everybody next Tuesday. Thank you so much for the time today, Jack.
You bet. Take care, everybody.